Tonight on our Century, those amazing eyewitnesses who took the sights and the sounds of the last 100 years and brought them home for all of us to see.
This young fellow was lucky, but many were not.
From those home movie buffs who've left us an amazing record of life as we lived it, to those adventurers who showed us faraway places with strange sounding names. And the moments, like the end of the Vietnam War, a world scoop captured by an Aussie legend, Neil Davis.
And he said, "You're American." I said, "No, I'm not. I promise I'm an Australian, and I've been waiting for you."
It was a Russian-built tank much like this one, which burst through the palace gates in Saigon. This wasn't the actual tank, of course, but this was the precious camera that filmed those historic moments. It's the one used by Neil Davis, a Tasmanian who's recognised as one of the great combat cameramen of the century, an eyewitness of some of the most bloody conflicts of our times. Over the past 100 years, all kinds of Australians have been eyewitnesses, not just to war, but to most of the memorable moments that have shaped our lives. Some were professionals like Neil Davis, but most were just home movie amateurs. All of them were there on the spot, recording history in the making. These are Australia's oldest surviving film pictures. The year is 1896, Saturday, the 31st of October, and a Frenchman, Marius Sestier, filmed Derby Day in Melbourne. Brisbane, 1899, and government cinematographer Fred Wills shot this early film of the Queen Street Bridge. Now, we don't have many pictures from our first eyewitness, but those that survive give us a fascinating glimpse of Australia in motion as our century began. Incredible as it may seem, much of the film from these early years comes from the Salvation Army. They had their own film unit. Other people saw the early films as a novelty, but the Salvos were quick to grab a new way to publicise their work. In 1901, thousands crowded into Melbourne Town Hall to see the premiere of Soldiers of the Cross. Produced by the Salvos Film Unit, it was a multimedia spectacular. They used film, coloured slides and live actors to dramatise the story of the early Christians. In January 1901, when the Australian government staged the huge celebration to mark Federation, they wanted a film record of the historic event. And the only producer big enough to do the job was the Salvation Army. When the first Governor-General and the Founding Fathers signed the documents that officially began the new Australia, they were making history in more ways than one. Australia was the first country in the world to be born on film. For the crowds on that day, there were extra cheers for the troops just back from the first round of victories in the Boer War in South Africa. The newspapers of the day were full of stories about the Boer War, thanks to war correspondents like Banjo Patterson. The famous author of The Man from Snowy River joined a club of journalistic heavyweights. They were out there to see the show. Figures like Rudyard Kipling, Winston Churchill, and the creator of Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle. But the Boer War was also the world's first movie war. This film, shot at the turn of the century, shows British cavalry preparing to attack a Boer position. The cameraman was in real danger. This is what happened shortly afterwards. By now it was clear that a film camera could go anywhere. One eyewitness took his camera to the bottom of the world. In 1913, British explorer Ernest Shackleton set out in a brave attempt to cross Antarctica. And with him to record it was the brilliant young Australian Frank Hurley. Hurley had been there before with his cameras, 2 years earlier, with Australian explorer Sir Douglas Mawson. What he didn't know was that he was about to shoot some of the most dramatic film yet seen. It began almost in tragedy, when their ship, the Endurance, got stuck in the ice. Hurley's amazing film showed the Endurance as it was crushed by the ice pack. These would become some of the most famous pictures of our century. With the ship gone, now came an incredible story of human survival. The men faced a long trek across the ice to a lonely camp. There they lived through the Antarctic winter, in temperatures minus 70 degrees. But it made Frank Hurley's reputation. On his return, he was regarded as one of the great eyewitness filmmakers in the world. Between his trips to the Antarctic, Hurley also filmed the mysterious world of New Guinea. Here he captured a prehistoric world as it made its first contact with the 20th century. When he died in the 1960s, Frank Hurley could truly claim to have been one of the eyewitnesses of our century. For generations of Aussie moviegoers, the Thinny Sound Kangaroo or the movie-tone kookaburras were an essential part of a night at the pictures. In the 1930s, the newsreels were king. In the world before television, they were the eyes and the ears of Australia. Camera teams went everywhere, whether it was important or whether it was just plain fun.
Hey, Harold, how do you get rid of them? Huh?
The Second World War took the newsreels into a new era of graphic coverage. Ace cameraman Damien Parra squatted in the nose of a Beaufort bomber to get these shots of a Japanese convoy under attack in the Bismarck Sea.
8 days ago, I was with our advanced troops in the jungle, facing the Japs at Kokoda.
The newsreels would make Parra a national hero. During Australia's greatest moment of peril, when the Japanese were at our front door in New Guinea, Parra became an eyewitness for all of us. His famous coverage of the Kokoda track would be the first Australian film ever to win an Academy Award. To Para, New Guinea was a close-up war. To bring home the truth of what it was really like, you had to be in amongst the bullets. His film of the battle to retake Salamoa in New Guinea's northeast coast was extraordinary.
At the base of that tree is a Jap foxhole. The ridge is honeycombed with them. Their defenders must be dislodged. A man is hit. He got a machine gun burst in the shoulder and back, 4 yards up that slope. Somebody has got to get close enough to that dugout to blast the yellow bellies out with hand grenades. Somebody will. He bowls a grenade into the opening. The position is won.
But just as film could show us the truth of war, it could also lie.
Through the medium of this film, which is a valuable means of giving information on latest events of our daily camp life.
In 1942, the Japanese forced Australian POWs to take part in this propaganda film about the prison camps in Java. According to the film, lavish kitchens prepared nourishing food for a fit and healthy bunch of Aussie diggers who wanted for nothing. It was a cruel hoax which showed officers living in comfortable bungalows, men relaxing poolside, even Aussies shopping in town, buying a dress for that special person back home. All bought with pay handed out generously by the Japanese. At the end of the war, we'd again turn to the newsreels for the real story of our troops' fate at the hands of the Japanese.
Some are pitifully emaciated from lack of proper food, but even these can raise a grin.
It's Tokyo Harbour, 1945. Reporters and cameramen from around the world jump on board the American battleship Missouri. They witness one of the sights of the century, the Japanese surrender of World War II. But this was not the sight that reporter Wilfred Burchett wanted to see. Armed with a borrowed pistol and his reporter's instinct, he'd snuck away and hopped a train to Hiroshima. The city, flattened by the first atomic blast, was still a mystery. But while the world struggled to understand how one bomb could end the war, Hiroshima, like most of Japan, was off limits to the press.
There was no city left. It was just dust. There was a very strange, sinister, sulphurous smell, and there were wisps of vapor coming up out of the ground. I went to a hospital which had survived in the outskirts of the city. These people were all in various states of physical disintegration. I felt staggered, really staggered by what I had seen, and just where I sat down, I found some lump of concrete, I remember, that had not been pulverized. I sat on that with my little Hermes typewriter, and my first words, I remember now, were, "I write this as a warning to the world."
Australians in the occupying force that ran Japan right after the war, the sight of such devastation was a bit too much to take.
We got on the train for Kaitachi. Nobody said a word. not one of us said a single bloody word, you know. And as we were looking at it, Slim was sitting right opposite me. He was a real soldier, you know. He looked across at me and he caught my eye and he said, "The poor bastards. The poor bastards."
The 60s and the 70s was the era of Vietnam and Cambodia. This was a new, dirty war that brought a new generation of eyewitnesses. As well as just staying alive, cameramen and journalists had to battle each other to win the nightly television news war. And no one was better than Neil Davis.
I would always try and go to the extreme front line because that's where the best film is. And the idea is, for a news cameraman, get the film and keep it rolling no matter what happens.
For more than a decade, Neil Davis dazzled his colleagues and television audiences with dramatic film reports. But in 1975, he got the scoop that would make him a legend. When North Vietnamese tanks crashed through the gates of the President's Palace in Saigon, ending 3 decades of conflict, Davis stayed behind with his trusty camera.
And a man with a weapon raced towards me, screaming in Vietnamese, "Stop, stop, stop." Well, I kept filming and we got quite close, and I rehearsed my bit before, which was in Vietnamese, "Welcome to Saigon, comrade." I've been waiting to film the liberation, and I had no qualms about that. I had it all right. And he said, "You're American." I said, "No, I'm not. I promise I'm an Australian, and I've been waiting for you."
Neil Davis somehow survived wars in Indochina, Africa and Lebanon. But after years in the front line, his luck eventually ran out. While covering a minor coup in Thailand, he was killed by a stray bullet. Now, the important thing about being an eyewitness is that you have to be there when it's happening. And even if you are on the spot, not everyone is happy to have their picture taken. Over the years, our home movies have left us an amazing record of the big and the little moments from our everyday lives. From the 1920s on, anyone could be an eyewitness with the arrival of the home movie camera. It's these eyewitnesses who've given us such a fascinating insight into our century. Like these ladies in the 1920s, all dressed up for the Launceston show in Tasmania. The images are much more intimate, as you'd expect, because they were shot by a family member. Our most famous amateur cameraman was none other than the former Prime Minister Sir Robert Menzies.
Of your country.
In 1941, Menzies visited our forces in North Africa and the Middle East. And he surprised everyone when he produced this.
Mr. Menzies is an ardent mini-camera fan, and if all his shots aren't underexposed and out of focus, he'll have a fine pictorial record when he comes planing home again.
And he was in good company. The young Queen Elizabeth, whom he admired so much, was also a home movies enthusiast.
The Queen made her own film record of the trip. A highlight, the line-crossing ceremony, when Lady Pamela Mountbatten was initiated by the Duke.
When I'm at my beach house, or relaxing anywhere, I keep my national color camera and portable recorder handy.
And as we reach the end of our century, it's never been easier to be an eyewitness, to record and share those personal images.
The JVC.
And over the last 10 years, video cameras have been getting smaller and smaller. And smaller. And they're so easy to use too, aren't they? If you happen to be a 14-year-old. They're certainly getting cheaper. So if you want to hang around for another 100 years and you've got one of these, then you and your family could be the stars of the next Our Century series in 2099, a bit like the Ruckett family of Brisbane. Mind you, having a camera is pretty much the easy part. Being a legendary eyewitness means being in the right place at the right time. And sometimes, as we've seen tonight, it means putting your life very much on the line.
If you've enjoyed Our Century, be sure to get a copy of the soundtrack CDs featuring music from the series, available at all good record stores.
My little companion, Lady Kingsford Smith.
How do you do, everybody?